We're talking about Brexit as well, aren't we?
Are we?
I think so, yeah. That was a brief
Thought it might come up.
You'd agreed.
Yeah.
Ready? Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for turning up. It does sort of feel at this stage in conference as if we might have had a slightly thin audience, but thankfully the Matt Hancock Stardust has worked. So thanks also, Matt, for agreeing to do this. I know that you've done quite a number of in-conversations with Matt Hancock already this conference, so we're going to have to try and find a few new angles today.
I was at them all.
Reassuringly. Some people have asked why I'm chairing this, and the background to that is that the proprietor of Conservative Home, Lord Ashcroft, who I'm pleased to say is glowering at me from the front row, is working on a book on the state of the NHS, which I am helping with. So this is our current project looking into how the health service is doing at the moment. And although we're all here as Conservatives at the Conservative Party conference, it is not designed to be a party political project, this. This is a look at, to try to take a cool look objectively at where we are now in terms of the state of the health service and where things are going. And there are a number of themes over the last few months of our research that have repeatedly come up, which I'm sure we will talk about, Matt and I. But I thought we should, since he's sort of agreed to talk about Brexit, we should get that out of the way. Matt, don't glaze over. You still got to.
It's all right.
We've got to do this, I'm afraid.
No, we do in every sense, yes.
What do you think the statistical chances are of us leaving on the 31st?
Extremely high. We've got to do it. We've got to get Brexit done. We're going to leave on the 31st of October.
So is that 100% then?
Yes.
Wow.
I think there's a determination. Look, I voted Remain, right? And the main reason I voted Remain was because I didn't think that the disruption was worth it. But I'm a Democrat, and we as a party are Democrats, and we believe in democracy. And when you call a vote, you abide by the result. Full stop. That is what democracy is about. So I'm one of those. So therefore we leave the European Union, and there is then there's advantages that come with that, and that we must maximise, and we will maximise. And then it comes to why then the 31st of October, and I want us to leave with a deal. I think it would be best for this country to leave with a deal. I strongly believe that, and I'm working to make that happen. But I also think that we need to prepare to leave without a deal, if that's what it comes to, because we've seen from the delay from the 29th of March, it hasn't moved the debate any further on. The issues are still exactly the same. So you wouldn't gain anything from a delay. And ultimately, if it comes down to a choice between leaving with no deal and not having Brexit at all and not delivering on the referendum result, then I choose the former. And that's the decision that I've come to, and I think it's broadly the decision that the party as a whole has come to as well. So it's incumbent on me to do the no-deal preparations as well, and that was one of the first things I did when I became Health Secretary 15 months ago. I said we have to do everything we possibly can to prepare for no deal. And that was at a time when it was really hard to get the Treasury to sign anything off to do with no deal preparation. But fortunately, in the Health Department, we have quite a large budget. So I gave the instruction that if it needed to be done, we'd pay for it. And if the Treasury blocked it, then I was quite prepared to get on and do it anyway. And so I think that's one of the reasons that come the 29th of March, we were regarded as one of the best prepared departments in Whitehall. So let's get it done, and then we can get on to talking about the NHS all the time and all the brilliant things we can do with it, and improving standards in schools, and I see Pretty's been on today, and making sure that we have police and all of the great things we can do. There's one final thing. that I'd say on this agenda, which is this. And I feel this very, very strongly, and I think it's incredibly important. The choice that we've got at this moment in time politically is really clear. So for people who don't think that we should be prepared to countenance no deal, and for friends of mine who are like me, of a liberal bent and are unenthusiastic about some of the things, there is a choice, and it's a really simple choice. It's either us, led by Boris Johnson, or it's Jeremy Corbyn. And the stark gap between those choices is so significant. And Jeremy Corbyn, he is not just another leader of the Labour Party. He is seriously damaging to everything that I think is good about Britain. And we've got to stop him. So my determination to stop Jeremy Corbyn means that the precise details of the departure from the European Union are, for me, completely second order to making sure Jeremy Corbyn never becomes Prime Minister.
Right. You say that you voted Remain because you didn't think the disruption of leaving was worth it. Do you now think the disruption will be worth it?
Yes, because the country voted that way. So because abiding by democracy is more important than those concerns.
And in terms of our last chances of getting a deal, the clock is obviously ticking pretty fast now.
Yeah.
What do you rate those chances of? I mean, it may well be that the Prime Minister does manage to negotiate something. I imagine that he will get some important concessions and he will come back to the Commons with a deal. But what is the prospect of that actually getting through?
I'm quite confident about that. So I think that the chances of leaving with a deal are more likely than not. And the reason is that it's in everybody's interest for us to leave with a deal. I think that I very much hope that the European Union will accept that the backstop will not go through the House of Commons, is not acceptable to the UK. After all, we have tried a few times. I think that, but it's not in the European Union's interests either to have a further delay or for a no-deal departure. I also think that it's in the interests of enough MPs from across the House to ensure that we leave with a deal. And I really hope, especially after this conference, where the sense of the Conservative Party coming together behind the proposition, the plan that we get Brexit done and then invest in the NHS, schools and police, which you might have noticed on some of the hoardings. My sense of this conference is that the party has really come together behind this plan. And I know there's a lot of noise on the TV whenever I watch it, and there's also other issues that have been aired at this conference. But actually, the sense of the party and the leadership being really close together is stronger than I've witnessed for years. So all of that gives me confidence that I think we're going to get this done, and I think we're going to leave with a deal on the 31st of October.
I mean, you've talked about the consequences of a Jeremy Corbyn administration. What about the consequences? Let's just say, worst case scenario, we go into the next election and we have not left the EU. What will
there isn't time for an election
be?
Before the 31st of October, so the
I think
premise
we have
of your
to,
question is false.
Realistically, there may well have to be an extension. I know you don't like that idea.
Hey, look, you were a Brexiteer, honestly.
I am, but I have to be realistic about it. I hope that you're right. What would be the consequences for the Conservative Party if you have to go into a general election and we've not left?
Well, I don't want to see that happen. I think we need to get Brexit done.
Okay. You said that the NHS was ready on the 29th of March to leave without a deal if we'd had to. All these months on, people are still going on about the possibility of disruption in medicine supplies. Is that complete bunkum, or is there some concern still about that?
Well, the truth is that there are always disruptions to the supplies of some medicines in the UK. And I have a team in the department who constantly are working on this. And so this is why I'm very careful around my language. We have a full plan in place. The National Audit Office last week came out with a report on it and said that the plans are in place. The plans are not yet fully executed. There are some areas where we've still got work to do, but we've got 30 days, and we have a plan to get all that necessary work done in time. But on this question of shortages, I'm always really clear. We have the full plan, and it will be fully in place by the 31st. But there are always shortages of different medicines for all sorts of reasons. Last year, you might have remembered the shortage of EpiPens, which was because of a problem in their factory. Over the summer, there was a shortage of HRT drugs because of a problem with their factory in Germany. And my continuity of supply team are constantly dealing with these shortages. And there's action that we can take irrespective of Brexit to make sure that there's continuity of supply. And we do that, and we'll make sure that that happens. And so we have the plan in place to ensure that there's the unhindered supply of medicines. We've done a huge amount of work on it. We have the plans in place to ensure that we can bring in short shelf life medicines by plane. We've got the plans in place to ensure that there's stockpiles of medicines that can be stockpiled in case there's blockages at the border, and we've got the plans in place to bring in drugs through other ports. We know more about the medicine supply chain in the UK than we ever have done before in history. There are 12,300 individual drugs that are prescription drugs in the UK that are licensed. There's about 7,000 of those, just over 7,000 of those, that have an EU footprint that come through or from the EU, and we have plans in place for all of these drugs and plans to get plans for the few where we are still sorting it out, and it'll all be done by the 31st
very reassuring.
of October.
Okay. I do want to move on to NHS stuff largely now, but just to finish off on Brexit, I mean, there's a lot of speculation around today. You'll be aware of on the front of the Times, for example, about the strategy that the Prime Minister may adopt to try to dissuade the EU from granting any extension. Do you think it would be a reasonable approach to threaten the EU that we will be as difficult and obstructive as possible within it if they are to grant us an extension? Because that is, I understand, very much something that is being considered as an approach.
Well, I think that it isn't in the EU's interests for an extension because the new Commission comes in on the 1st of November. There's all sorts of reasons why it's better for them to get this done whilst this commission is in post. I generally take the approach of collaboration being the best way to achieve things and working with people. I hope that we can conclude these negotiations on that basis.
But if not, do you think that making it clear that we won't be particularly cooperative is a good approach? You noticed that
I didn't answer the question.
I did. Yeah. Been around a while, Matt.
But that was intentional. I mean, I'm not across the details of any of those sorts of proposals. That is
a non-denial, folks. So let's move on to the health service. You've talked a lot this week about vaccines and the particular question over whether or not it should be made compulsory for toddlers to have the MMR vaccine.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how far you think you should take this. I mean, why stop with the MMR? What about, for example, making it compulsory for girls and boys to have the HPV vaccine?
Yeah, so this is an incredibly important area, and I think we should all be shocked that the World Health Organization has removed Britain's designation as a measles-free country. I think that is shocking, and I think it needs to be tackled. I said on Sunday that I can see the strong arguments for moving to compulsory vaccination. We've got a whole load of work underway in order to try to increase the vaccination rate anyway. I've been very struck by the support, but there's also been people who've voiced concerns, and I get those. I think this is something where the goal is really clear, which is we've got to get the vaccination rates for measles back up, and I'm willing to consider all of these options. But we've also got to do it in a way that works. So what matters is what works in this space. When it comes to the other vaccinations, I'm not sure that we're there yet. Not least because the vaccination rates in the case of HPV are going up very sharply.
Right.
HPV is also done differently, and maybe there's a lesson here for measles, which is that HPV is done essentially through schools are involved. It's done at an older age, whereas MMR ought to be done when kids are 2 and 3. So I think I mean clearly the debate has kicked off. I've said what I think in terms of the strong argument. I think now it's time to listen to the cases that are put, for instance, by the Royal College of Paediatric Medicine. And the Royal College of GPs, who've got slightly different and nuanced views, and then work a way forward.
Has being Health Secretary changed your perception of the NHS since now you are all over all the detail?
Yeah.
How has that affected the way you see things?
Great question. I think that. Can I say I think it's affected my view of the NHS in good ways and bad.
Okay.
If I'm going to be completely honest.
Can we hear about the bad first? Because we all know what politicians say about good on the NHS.
Well, no. We'll do the good first.
Do them in order then.
Because you'll then press me on the bad.
I will anyway. But
the good ways are that I've been. It is slightly extraordinary becoming the Health Secretary, because people come up to you and want to thank the NHS by thanking you, and I have people come up to me quite regularly now and burst into tears and tell me about when the NHS was there for them and their family, whether it was successful in the end or not. Quite often people tell me about very close members of their family who've died and the care that they got from the NHS. And it is deeply emotional. It is deeply emotional, this job. And I was talking on the main stage yesterday about everyone's got an emotional connection to the NHS. This is not a policy issue only. People have an emotional connection because it's there at these times in your life, the best times and the worst times. And the full extent of that, even though I have also been deeply touched by the impact of the NHS, especially for members of my family, just the depth of that is the good thing that I've mentioned. The bad thing is that you would have thought that working in the NHS would be brilliant, and because it's such a mission-driven organisation, working in the NHS should be the best job in the world, and it's very sad, and I'm absolutely determined to tackle it, that there is a higher level of bullying and harassment in the NHS than in most other organisations. And it's totally unacceptable. And there's a culture, a very hierarchical culture in many NHS organisations. Not in all. There are beacons that are absolutely brilliant and really well led. But there's far too many parts of the NHS where there's too much bullying and harassment. I wear this rainbow badge because there is too much homophobic bullying. There are instances of racist bullying as well. I think it's totally. It was shocking to me. It was shocking to me to find out that this organisation of 1.4 million people, who I am the steward of, and the political figurehead of, doesn't care enough about its own people, and that has got to change.
So would you say overall it's not actually a happy place to work?
I don't think I'd say that, no, because on the other side of the ledger for working in the NHS is the amazing reward that you get for caring for people, you know, saving lives every day, and people find that deeply rewarding. The sadness is that it should be that is offset by this totally unnecessary low-grade culture that we need to change. And so there's lots of reasons that this is the case. One of them is that the sort of attitude to the workforce in the NHS in the past has been all based on numbers. You know, we've got to drive the numbers. We need more nurses and doctors. It is true we need more nurses and doctors, and we are hiring more nurses and doctors in a big way. And we're training more, and the numbers are going in the right direction. But the management of a large workforce and large organisation is about so much more than the numbers on a spreadsheet. And there hasn't been nearly enough to train people, to inculcate that positive culture and the positive leadership that you need to get that culture right at every level, where everybody feels that they can make a contribution and where people respect each other and treat each other with respect.
I mean, this has actually gone on for absolutely years, hasn't it? There have been all sorts of initiatives on bullying and also, crucially, on whistleblowing. And one of the things that has struck me in the months that I've spent with on this NHS project is that it appears that there are still major issues around whistleblowing, and people overall, for all the laudable initiatives taken by yourself and your predecessors in terms of putting in place in each trust someone that you can safely go and talk to. Unfortunately, the reality is people do not feel safe reporting issues in a whistleblowing capacity, and people lose their livelihoods and their whole careers. And I have been shocked by what I've found out about this.
So you've been through the same experience I went through, and I think part of the problem there is that initiatives have been put in place, and you use the word initiatives, and it's telling. Initiatives have been put in place to try to solve bullying as if it's something that can be solved separately from how organisations are run. And the solution to this is about leadership. It's about high-quality leadership. And leadership doesn't just happen. You can train for it. And part of the problem is that, you know, if you train as a doctor and a very, very successful doctor and are then asked to step up to a leadership capability, you need a different type of training. You need extra training. You need to be taught the different skill sets of leading a team, because the task of understanding what it is to be, say, a surgeon is different. And the best, of course, many brilliant leaders in the NHS are both, but there hasn't been nearly enough focus on that leadership. So the people plan, which we're launching at by the end of the year, is going to be focused on the leadership capabilities that we need all the way through the system, from chief executives all the way through to, you know, the ward sister who is a leader in his or her area. It's absolutely critical at all levels, and I think we can learn from a lot of different areas. And a lot of different organisations in how we can do this better. For instance, the NHS got its first chief people officer only a few months ago. Until then, there simply wasn't what every other large organisation would think of as its people function, its HR function. That just didn't exist. It's systemic and it needs to change.
You have made IT your big thing. In all the work that I have been doing in the last few months, talking to doctors and patients and clinicians at every level, I am so shocked still, I'm afraid, by the inability to actually get the basics. GPs, I think, are in a slightly better position on this, but, you know...
Still some way to go.
Right. I mean, hospitals routinely... If you turn up at A&E, they have no access to any information about you. It may be that you may be literally about to die from a cardiac event, and they've got no information about your basic medical history. When you're discharged from hospital, if you've been an inpatient for even for a number of weeks. It's often that you're moved on. Let's say an elderly person gets moved to a care home, no discharge summary.
Yeah.
And then the GP that goes into the care home to look after the elderly person who may be at end of life care has no notes whatsoever.
Yeah.
This is basic stuff.
Yeah.
How come
Yeah.
year after year after year it's
Yeah.
not being achieved?
Well, I think there's a reason for it, which is that 15 years ago, when Labour brought in the national programme for IT, they thought IT needed improving, and it did, and they tried a single national programme to impose that on everybody. It was a £10 billion project, and it failed, and people lost their jobs. And then a few years ago, when the next round of attempt to fix this was brought in, we had a problem. We had the care.data scandal, which was about promises were given over the privacy of data that were not accurate, and a whole load of people removed their consent from the sharing of IT, and people lost their jobs. So there was an aversion to anybody really touching this, and I turned up, and technology is the only thing I knew about in the health service, so I thought I'd better have a go at it. And maybe partly because I was in technology before I came into politics, and I could code, and my first job was decoding, was helping to solve the Y2K bug in COBOL. So so I'm self-confident in my understanding of IT, and I thought if I can't do it, that if I don't try to do this, then that is a big missed opportunity. So that was my approach on arrival. I think lots of people muddle up the need for the top end technology and artificial intelligence to make breakthroughs and improvements in treatments, which is incredibly important and very, very exciting and going great guns, and I'm very enthusiastic about. With also the huge effort that's needed for frontline technology, because that's what is people really complain about, right? Yeah. The number one complaint we asked about what people thought about their IT. The number one complaint is how long it takes to log on. Anybody who works in the NHS in the audience?
Yeah.
How long does it take to log on? Right? Ages. Average time 20 minutes. Yeah. Totally ridiculous. And then if it kicks you out halfway through the day, you then have to go through this process again. There are some hospitals with 50 separate IT systems with separate logons. And this is for members of staff, where you know who that member of staff is, and that member of staff will typically have a digital identity, and they don't talk to each other. It's totally unacceptable. And it's got to change. And this frontline technology, I thought that going in with a tech background, I might get kicked out by the system, and people say, "Oh, really? We don't need all that smart stuff."
We really do.
But we really do. And people bite my hand off. I never knew that when talking to a large group of nurses, if I just said the word interoperability, everybody got very excited. The systems don't talk to each other. Now, there is some progress from what you said. So you painted the bleak picture, and many parts of it are bleak. But there is progress. Firstly, now, if you go into secondary care, into a hospital, there is access to the summary care record, not the full GP record, but the summary care record. I think it's got about 98% coverage, so almost everywhere. So that does mean that now, if you turn up at A&E and you've had a very serious accident, for instance, they will be able to find out, if they can find out your identity, they'll be able to find out from the system whether you have a penicillin allergy or that sort of thing. So there has been that progress. The second thing is there are some real hotspots. In Leeds, they connect GP records to hospital records, to social care records, and also to hospice records, for instance. And that works much better. At Imperial in London, if you wish, they do those connections, and if you wish, you can then see all of that. And as a patient, and I think that's where we need to get to, that patients have control over this. over their own data in the same way that you have control over your financial data.
How would that work? Would we all have a kind of card, or how would it?
Well, everybody's got an NHS number, so that is the.
Although nobody probably knows what it is.
No, but that can be dealt with because you know your name and address, and that's unique to your NHS number. I mean, except for the rare instances where two people with the same name live in the same household. But you can reach a unique identifier through usually your name and address and date of birth, unless they're twins with the same name, but I think that's quite unlikely. But name and address and date of birth gets you a unique identifier. That can link you to your NHS number. And then so you can, in the case of Imperial, you can download the Imperial app if you've given your consent. Right. And then you can see your record, your primary care, secondary care record. There's about 30,000 people who now have it. It's really important to get the privacy settings right here. Really important. And too much in the past, this has been slowed down by concerns about privacy of data. But we can get there, and I'm absolutely determined to. And
I absolutely get that whole thing about the concerns on privacy. But do you think because of those concerns in the Blair years, you mentioned the care data so-called scandal, have we become too queasy about the idea of actually tapping into this incredible resource of NHS data, which could be of such great use for scientific research?
I'm not queasy about it at all, because I think that the idea there's a trade-off between usability of data and privacy of data is wrong.
Yeah.
Get a good data architecture and it's better for both. Look at how far we've come in banking. Who's been into their bank in the last 6 months? Okay.
A few.
Maybe 10% of us.
Yeah.
I haven't been into my bank for maybe 10 years. My financial information is as sensitive as anybody else's. But I bank on this thing, right? And so we've cracked it for financial information, which has to be rigorous, as in it can't be changeable by fraud in the same way that medical data has to. It has to be private. It has to have high cyber security. But we've cracked it, and we can crack it in health data as well. And that's what I'm planning to do.
And do you think that health data should be in completely anonymised form? Can you see a time when that's made available to big companies for whatever use you might decree to be acceptable?
Well, that already happens for consented data. So in the biobank is one of the UK biobank is an amazing thing. I didn't know about it before I became health secretary. 500,000 people have consented that their information on an anonymised basis can be used in research. And we are currently also sequencing the genome of that 500,000 people so that the clinical data and the genomic data, and I hope in time the experiential data, the data you get about how much exercise you do and what you eat and all that sort of thing, is already there and accessible for research purposes. And it's really interesting that who's here from the big health charities? That the big health charities, their number one ask of me these days is not money, it is data.
Yeah.
It's appropriate access to data, because that is how we are going to solve heart disease and Alzheimer's. And yesterday I was with the Epilepsy Society, and their number one ask is data. Data. This is how there's so many insights in the data. You've got to get the rules right. You've got to get the cybersecurity right. But there are untold things that we can do. We can make it easier to survive cancer if you have better access to data, and we'll work with innovators inside and outside the NHS to make it happen.
I'm conscious we've got only a quarter of an hour left, and I know there are going to be a lot of people with questions, but I just want to finish off asking you about Babylon, because I think I'm right in thinking you're a Babylon patient.
Yeah.
So tell me how your experience is of using that app. This is for anybody in the audience that doesn't know about Babylon. It's a private company, but it is not for profit at the moment, and is providing GP services to tens of thousands of people, mainly in London, via an app. And Matt is a big fan. But I think there are many in the medical community who have some significant concerns about it. And I have to say, I'm amazed that there hasn't been more fuss about the effectively a private company being allowed to take over a chunk of GP services.
Well, therein lies a tale, because there's been this row about privatisation in the NHS for a long time, and I gently point out to people that what matters is that the NHS is free at the point of delivery. And my proof point of this is that this row is the argument against the use of private provision within the NHS is really simple. I am against the privatisation of the NHS because I think it should always be free at the point of use according to need, not ability to pay. But the NHS has always bought things.
Right.
Those blasted fax machines I'm trying to get rid of. They weren't manufactured by the NHS. And you raised GPs. GPs
They're private businesses.
Private businesses, largely. Not all of them. Largely private businesses, and so as with the new ones, so the new entrant GPs like Babylon are also not part. They are private businesses who are supplying by contract into the NHS. That is how we arrange primary care in this country, and always have done since it was Bevan's idea. I mean, move over momentum. This guy was quite left wing, so I'm a Babylon customer. I was before I became health secretary. Customer's the wrong word. They are my GP. That started before I became health secretary. For me, as a pretty healthy, very active, time-poor
They're
person,
just the kind of patient that Babylon wants,
yes,
by the way. Nice and easy.
Right. So then there's several parts of the controversy around them. Some criticisms that are fair and some that are not fair. The ones that are not fair is that we shouldn't have new providers in the GP space because we GPs like to keep our existing patient list. Well, I don't buy that. People should have choice of where they have their GP. More reasonable is that people saying Babylon are more likely to get relatively healthy people than old people, say, who have high needs. And so we have now changed that system so that the amount of funding that goes to Babylon appropriately takes into account, more so than in the past, the patient mix that they get.
Right.
But that was a classic case of where the regulations and the government side of things had to catch up with the technology.
Yep.
This is often the case when you get a new technology. The regulations have to change in order to keep pace with what's going on. But there's the NHS is now rolling out access to Babylon to Birmingham, and I don't particularly espouse for them. There's other companies in this space as well that are providing. And what I do care about is that people have access to their GPs in interesting and innovative ways. And I've seen the efficiency that a good GP practice has when they use phone, internet type Facebook Live or Skype or whatever, face to face over the phone, a video phone essentially. I'm trying to it's so much quicker. And if I need to talk to my GP, it's interesting. If it often only takes a couple of minutes as opposed to a full 10-minute slot if you do it on the phone. And so we've got to embrace this new technology. And I know that there are some people who are less enthusiastic about it than me. But we also sometimes have to change the rules to make sure that they're fair for the new technology.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. And I know some hands going up already. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to take the gentleman at the front straight away because I know he's a doctor. So if you could say who you are and keep your questions brief, not please a long conversation.
Yep. I'm Richard Volturi. I'm a GP in Leeds. So, Isabel, you'll be very welcome to come to Leeds to see the Leeds Care record in action.
I'd love to. Thank you.
And I'm the chair of the BMA's GP committee. So, Matt, thank you very much for your emphasis on MMR this week. I think that's really, really important, and we'd really like to talk to you about how we can get uptake rates really high, because that's what we want to do as GPs. We want to protect our patients and our children particularly. I just wanted to talk...
Would you go compulsory?
I would rather that we do everything possible before we get to compulsory. But I think one thing might be using the NHS app as the front end, so that every patient got their immunisation status in their palms, so they knew exactly what their status was. Getting the prompts through that would be one way to actually tackle it, but we'd like to talk to you about it. One thing we haven't mentioned is workforce, and we have real concerns, particularly about GP numbers. It's really good that you are encouraging doctors to become GPs, but it's retaining GPs. What can we do about the pensions issue that's really impacting GP retention?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because that is the number one issue, would you say, across the NHS, is workforce. It is the shortage of people. Really.
People. Yes. I think it's, when my top three priorities of people, prevention and technology, people is the top one. And there's so much more we can do. We talked about the culture, which is less of a problem in primary care than in secondary care, I'd say, partly just by the nature of primary care tending to be smaller teams. There's and absolutely retention is a problem. I mean, there's record numbers of GPs in training, which is exciting and terrific. But it takes years to train a GP. You can lose them very quickly. And so the pension issue is absolutely a problem that we've got to fix. We've put out a consultation. We will do what is necessary to ensure that there aren't these totally inappropriate high marginal tax rates at over 100%. We Conservatives understand the impact of high marginal tax rates, and we need to deal with them. So we have a consultation out now. There's calls for further action on the taper, which the Treasury have said that they will look at. That is very much a tax measure, and Sajid wouldn't be extremely pleased if I went any further.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman right at the back there.
Thank you. Secretary of State Sam Graham from Biogen, US biotech firm. Been really interested in your views on the major announcement made by the Leader of the Opposition last week on the pharmaceutical industry, compulsory licensing and genericization.
Yeah, so, I mean, the Labour Party, honestly. The UK life sciences industry is absolutely brilliant and world-beating. We all want to have cheaper drugs, prescription drugs,
This just got a load more exciting.
And we've taken measures to ensure that we use the massive buying power of the NHS to reduce our drugs bill, and we had a very good negotiation this time last year, which we settled a 5-year agreement. And on generics, we've also taken measures to reduce the cost to taxpayers of generics. But the idea that you would undermine intellectual property in order to go further on that would undermine research, because people wouldn't be able to recoup the value of their research. And by undermining research, it would put lives at risk. It's future lives that will be saved by innovations that won't happen if you don't respect intellectual property. And it's all part of an overriding sense that they simply don't understand the importance of protecting private property that we saw across education policy and across health policy, and whether it's school buildings or the intellectual property of research-based companies. Private property is a critical foundation of a successful society, and there's been no successful society that hasn't respected private property, and it's one of the reasons that we all need to stick together and keep them out.
A lady right at the back. Thank you.
Drawing on that, I'm part of the All Can Be campaign and the Life Saving campaign. I'm a parent to someone with cystic fibrosis, and they were actually talking about the long battle we've had with trying to get access, and this was, I know the family that met Jeremy Corbyn. What we would like to know is obviously a sensible solution to this issue.
Yes.
Being Conservative, Jeremy Corbyn's solution is not a solution. It's disturbing, and obviously with cystic fibrosis, it's a brilliant template for this. The up-and-coming drugs we don't want to block. We don't want that to go away. So what we need is catching up with the technology of precision meds, investment, and reform of policy and things to help support that.
Yes.
So, like to hear sort of some solutions on this.
So, Orkambi is a case in point. It's probably the most difficult case that we've got in the UK at the moment. It is a drug that has benefits for people with cystic fibrosis, but the prospective benefits of the next generation of drugs are much higher. We frequently, the NHS frequently negotiates with companies that have the intellectual property. They'll come up with a drug in order to get life-saving drugs available on the NHS. And with many other companies, these negotiations go on all of the time. A couple of weeks ago, we concluded successfully a negotiation for a drug that combats Batten's disease, for instance, which is Batten's disease, a really, really sad disease for that is due to a genetic mutation. Some children suffer, and we managed to conclude successfully an agreement. Vertex, the company that produces Orkambi, I don't want to be too rude about them because we are trying to negotiate, but they have been the least open to a successful negotiation. I'm meeting the chief executive actually later this month.
I agree with you. I've been in the campaign right at the beginning of it. I agree with you. But we have got a deal in Scotland. So they are funding it in Scotland. So
that's right. So look, all I'm saying, what I can say is I'm absolutely working to get a deal on Orkambi. There is I hope that we can get a deal. We have got a very generous offer already on the table, and I hope that we can conclude it.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, and I have promised two people, the gentleman in the extremely striking jacket and this gentleman here. Can you ask really quick questions, one to the next, and then Matt can wrap up?
Preventable medicine, the Cinderella of the NHS, only 5% of your budget, 50% of preventable illnesses are preventable. Could your new budget do more? And if you want some recruits from the communication industry to do it for nothing, I'm sure I can recruit some for you.
Right.
And can we have this question, and then we can get Matt out on time?
I changed my question because you started with Brexit, so you could say you started it. I write for the Asian Today newspaper, and I'm just wondering, Matt, would you pay tribute to India, who train thousands of doctors who operate over here in the NHS and will be increasingly sourced post-Brexit?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, I love the agenda that underpins both of these questions. So, firstly, the amount of people who have come to this country and saved lives and made our lives better from around the world is fantastic, and we want to attract the brightest and the best to this country, and I think it's been brilliant, and India has been foremost in those, but we've got much more to do, and we've got a recruitment campaign because we need more people. We're training people at home, but we're also going to get the brilliant people from abroad. Finally, on the prevention agenda, I suppose one of my other answers to your very first question of what surprised you is looking at my budget and seeing just how much of it goes into essentially fixing people afterwards. And I think that we should see our health as an asset. We should, as individuals, and we as the state, should see the health of the nation as an asset. And we should help people to stay healthy. And this is true in mental health as well as physical health. The NHS itself needs to do far more to help people, not just fix them, but help them stay healthy. The whole long-term plan has this premise at its heart. But it's absolutely true that the budgets do not yet reflect that. For instance, we need to see a rising proportion of the budget going into primary care, and that will happen. We also need to use pharmacies far more because they are pre-primary care, if you like, and other countries like the French do that better, and we have a new pharmacy contract to be able to do that. And it's also actually philosophical, which is that we shouldn't just think about the rights that we have to treatment from the NHS. We should also think about the responsibilities that we have to ourselves and to not overburdening the system.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt. Really stimulating discussion. Thank you.